This is how credit card debt quietly dismantles your retirement. Not in a single dramatic collapse, but through years of interest payments that silently drain the money you'll need decades from now. Over $1 trillion in credit card debt sits on the backs of American consumers right now, accruing interest at rates no investment can reliably beat. And every one of those interest dollars will never see the inside of a retirement account. What we're covering today is the full picture, the math, the history that built the system, the psychology that keeps people trapped in it, and the structural forces working against them. Once you understand how credit card interest and compound investment growth pull in opposite directions, you'll see that carrying a balance doesn't just cost you money today. That balance reaches forward in time and takes from the person you'll become in 20 or 30 years. Let's get into the numbers, because they tell a story most people have never fully heard. By the fourth quarter of 2024, total U.S. credit card debt had climbed to approximately $1.21 trillion, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And that figure represented a new record. $1 trillion in the most expensive form of consumer debt most people will ever carry, sitting across hundreds of millions of accounts. The interest rates attached to those balances tell the other half of the story. According to the Federal Reserve SG.19 Consumer Credit Report, the average rate on accounts being assessed interest stood at roughly 21.76% as of the third quarter of 2024. And that was the average. Retail and subprime cards were charging 28, 29, even 30% or higher based on Consumer Financial Protection Bureau analyses and industry data. Back in 2013, Federal Reserve data showed the average credit card rate sitting around 12.9%, which means rates nearly doubled across a single decade. And this reaches far beyond a small, unlucky group. A Bankrate survey from January 2024 found that about 49% of credit card holders carry a balance from month to month, which is essentially half of everyone holding a card. A 2024 Clever Real Estate survey reported that 48% of Americans with credit card debt say it has directly prevented them from saving for retirement. That number deserves a pause, because it means nearly half of indebted consumers recognize the connection between their credit card balances and their vanishing futures, and they still can't break free. Bankrate found in a 2023 survey that 36% of Americans carry more credit card debt than emergency savings. For over a third of the country, the debt has already overtaken the safety net. All of this builds toward the central problem. Credit card interest doesn't just take money from your present. Every dollar swallowed by that interest can never be invested, can never compound, and can never grow into retirement savings. Financial educators have started describing credit card interest as a retirement tax, an involuntary deduction from your future wealth. Unlike real taxes that fund public services, this one enriches credit card issuers and gives the consumer nothing back. The idea driving this entire video comes down to two words: opportunity cost. Most people think of credit card debt in terms of the interest charges printed on their monthly statement. And those charges are a genuine loss. But the far larger cost never shows up on any statement. It is the money you would have accumulated in retirement if those interest dollars had been invested instead. Here is how that works in practice. Say $200 a month goes toward credit card interest, adding up to $2,400 a year, feeding your card issuer. Now picture redirecting that same $2,400 annually into a retirement account, earning an average 8% return. And doing that for 30 years. The result would be approximately $283,000 in accumulated wealth. Read that number again. $200 a month in credit card interest, stretched across 3 decades, represents roughly $283,000 in retirement savings that will never exist. The raw interest paid over that span totals about $72,000, which stings on its own. But the actual loss from forfeited compound growth runs nearly 4 times larger. Behavioral economics explains why so few people grasp this. Researchers have identified a pattern called exponential growth bias, which describes the human tendency to badly underestimate how compounding works over long periods. People underestimate both how much their debt will cost them across time and how much their investments could grow. And when those two blind spots collide, the damage compounds in both directions. You minimize the danger of carrying debt while simultaneously minimizing what you're sacrificing by not investing. That combination creates what amounts to a double penalty. You lose money to interest, which is penalty 1. Penalty 2 arrives silently, as the growth that money could have generated simply vanishes from your timeline. The second penalty almost always dwarfs the first. Now consider someone holding $10,000 in credit card debt at 21% APR and paying only the minimum, which lands at 1 to 2% of the balance, or a floor of $25 to $35. Paying off that balance could stretch beyond 30 years under those conditions, with total interest running somewhere between $19,000 and $24,000. On $10,000 worth of original purchases, the interest alone would exceed the principal, sometimes by more than double. And during every one of those years, each interest payment represents money that never reaches an investment account. The Card Act, which took effect in February 2010, actually forced issuers to print a minimum payment warning on every statement showing how long payoff would take at minimum payments versus a higher fixed amount. That information sits right there on the paper, but research shows that most consumers either miss it entirely or don't change their behavior after reading it. Understanding the full weight of this situation requires looking at the state of American retirement savings on its own, because the picture was already troubling before credit card debt entered the equation. The Federal Reserve's 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances, released in October 2023, and still the most recent comprehensive dataset available, put the median retirement account balance for all American families at $87,000. Among families headed by someone between 55 and 64, people within sight of retirement, the median sat at approximately $185,000. Vanguard's 2024 How America Saves report, drawing on 2023 data, breaks the 401k picture open further. The average 401k balance came in at about $134,128, but the median told a very different story at approximately $35,286. That enormous gap between the mean and median reveals extreme skew, where a small number of very large accounts inflate the average, while the person in the middle holds roughly $35,000. Fidelity Investments has offered a benchmark suggesting people should aim for about 10 times their annual salary and savings by age 67 for a comfortable retirement. And by that standard, the overwhelming majority of Americans fall dramatically short. The National Institute on Retirement Security has found repeatedly that approximately 40 to 50% of working age households hold zero retirement savings. Not low balances, but literally nothing. Research from the FINRA Investor Education Foundation adds another layer. People carrying high levels of credit card debt are far less likely to participate in employer-sponsored retirement plans, and far less likely to contribute consistently when they do participate. What emerges from all of this is a collision. On one side sits a retirement savings situation that is already critically inadequate for most Americans. On the other side sits record credit card debt at near-record interest rates, actively blocking people from saving. These aren't separate crises that happen to coexist. They feed each other in a reinforcing cycle that grows harder to escape with every passing year. Making sense of the current situation means tracing two parallel histories: the evolution of credit card interest rates and the transformation of the American retirement system. Both underwent radical changes starting in the late 1970s, and the interaction between them explains much of where we've ended up. Credit cards first. A 1978 Supreme Court case called Marquette National Bank of Minneapolis v. First of Omaha Service Corp. established that banks could charge the interest rate allowed by the state where they were headquartered, regardless of where the borrower lived. That ruling cracked open the entire interest rate structure for the credit card industry. A bank based in a state with no rate cap could charge whatever the market would bear to customers in every other state. The consequences arrived fast. Between 1980 and 1981, South Dakota under Governor Bill Janklow eliminated its state usury ceiling entirely. And this was no accident of deregulation. Janklow designed the move specifically to attract Citibank, which relocated its credit card operations to South Dakota in exchange for jobs and tax revenue. Delaware enacted similar legislation shortly after. Most Americans have no idea this history shapes their finances, but it does. The reason your credit card agreement references South Dakota or Delaware law, no matter which state you call home, traces back to these decisions in the early 1980s. A single governor's policy choice reshaped how much interest Americans would pay on consumer debt for generations that followed. The retirement system was undergoing its own upheaval during the same window. ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, became law in 1974 and built the framework for employer-sponsored retirement plans. Section 401k entered the Internal Revenue Code in 1978 as part of the Revenue Act, though nobody fully recognized its implications at the time. Not until 1981, when the IRS clarified that 401k plans could accept employee salary deferrals. Did the modern 401k system come to life? What unfolded over the following decades was a sweeping transfer of responsibility. Employers abandoned traditional defined benefit pensions, where the company bore the investment risk, and guaranteed a specific income in retirement, and replaced them with 401k plans that handed every major decision and all of the risk to the employee. Teresa Gallarducci, a labor economist at the New School for Social Research, has spent years arguing that the 401k experiment broadly failed American workers. Her position holds that it started as a tax loophole that got repurposed into a retirement system, placing impossible demands on individuals to handle financial complexity that most aren't equipped to manage. Congressional patches have come along over the years. The Pension Protection Act of 2006 pushed automatic enrollment in 401k plans and promoted target date funds as defaults, which meaningfully boosted participation. The Secure Act arrived in 2019, and Secure 2.0 followed in 2022, raising the required minimum distribution age and broadening access to retirement plans. But here's the tension running beneath all of those reforms. Every one of them assumes people have money available to save. When half of credit card holders carry balances at 21% or more, a massive portion of the workforce simply does not have that money. The retirement system asks people to voluntarily set aside dollars for their future selves, while the credit card system extracts as much as possible from their present selves. Those two forces pull in opposite directions, and for tens of millions of Americans, the credit card system is winning. Everything got measurably worse during the most recent economic cycle. Beginning in March 2022, the Federal Reserve started raising the federal funds rate aggressively, pushing it from near zero all the way up to 5.25 to 5.50% by July 2023, a response to surging inflation that landed directly on credit card holders. Most credit card rates are variable and track the prime rate, which itself follows the federal funds rate. Every Fed hike translated into higher APRs on credit cards. Average rates climbed from around 16% in early 2022 past 20% by 2023, eventually landing at approximately 21.76% as reported for the third quarter of 2024. Balances were growing at the same time. People were borrowing more money at higher rates simultaneously, and by the third quarter of 2024, total credit card debt hit a record $1.17 trillion per the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, before climbing to approximately $1.21 trillion by year end. Delinquencies told their own grim story. The rate of balances transitioning into serious delinquency, meaning 90 or more days past due, rose to roughly 11.1% based on Federal Reserve Bank of New York data. That was the highest reading since approximately 2010 or 2011, the tail end of the Great Recession's fallout. Rate cuts did begin in September 2024, with the Fed trimming further in November and December to bring the target range down to 4.25 to 4.50% by the end of the year. But here's the thing about credit card rates. Issuers move slowly when it comes to passing cuts along to their customers. A full percentage point of Fed cuts in the final months of 2024 translated into only modest relief for people carrying balances. The net effect was a prolonged stretch in which the gap between what consumers paid on credit card debt and what they could reasonably expect to earn on investments sat wider than it had been in years. When your card charges 22% and a diversified portfolio returns 7 to 10% over the long term on average, every dollar stuck in the debt cycle moves further away from building wealth. And that is before you even account for the compounding lost on the investment side. Several mechanisms built into the credit card system make this problem far stickier than it might first appear, and each one deserves its own examination. The minimum payment structure comes first. Card companies set minimums at 1 to 2% of the outstanding balance, or a floor of $25 to $35, whichever is greater, on a $5,000 balance at 21% APR. This design means early payments get almost entirely consumed by interest, with barely anything touching the principal. And as the balance slowly drops, the minimum payment drops with it, stretching the timeline even further. A $5,000 balance under these terms could take more than 30 years to extinguish, and cost more in interest than the original amount borrowed. That minimum payment structure isn't an accident. Card issuers calibrate it precisely to keep debt serviceable, preventing default, while maximizing the total interest extracted over the life of the balance. The second trap involves 401k loans. Consumers overwhelmed by credit card debt sometimes turn to borrowing against their retirement accounts, which can look rational on the surface since it replaces 21% credit card interest with a lower rate loan from yourself. The hidden costs tell a different story. Borrowed money stops compounding for the duration of the loan. And leaving your job, whether by choice or not, can trigger a demand for rapid repayment. Failure to repay converts the loan into a taxable distribution, with an additional 10% penalty for anyone under 59 and a half. According to Vanguard's How America Saves report, a meaningful percentage of 401k participants carry outstanding loans against their accounts, which means this isn't a theoretical risk. People regularly deplete the very retirement savings that credit card debt was already preventing them from building. The third dimension is generational, and it hits Gen X hardest, born between approximately 1965 and 1980. This group sits close enough to retirement that their remaining working years are limited. Yet, many carry heavy credit card balances. Experian data and other analyses show that Gen X tends to hold the highest average credit card balances of any generation. Less time remains for compound growth to work in their favor, and they're shouldering the largest debt loads. For this cohort, the erosion of retirement savings by credit card interest is not a future hazard to worry about. It is a present tense emergency with a shrinking window for correction. One of the most contested questions in personal finance sits right here. If credit card debt and limited income both define your reality, where should your next dollar go? 3 schools of thought have staked out clear positions, and each one carries genuine weight. The first says, pay off the credit card debt before investing a single dollar anywhere. Dave Ramsey and Suze Orman both advocate this approach, and the logic is hard to argue with. Eliminating a card charging 21% interest produces the equivalent of a guaranteed 21% return on that money. And no investment offers that kind of certainty. Under this framework, the highest interest debt disappears first, always. The second position adds a critical wrinkle. Even while carrying credit card debt, you should contribute enough to your 401k to capture the full employer match. Many employers match at 50 cents or $1 for every employee, dollar up to a certain percentage of salary, between 3 and 6% in most cases. That match delivers an immediate 50 to 100% return on contributed dollars, which outpaces even a brutal credit card AP. Walking away from it means leaving guaranteed money behind. Certified financial planners and groups, like the Financial Planning Association, have endorsed this approach, recommending you secure the match first and then direct everything else at the debt. The third perspective pulls back from individual strategy entirely and targets the system. Teresa Gallarducci and other scholars have argued that telling individuals to find their own way out of this problem falls short. When wages have stagnated against the cost of living, when pensions have been replaced by 401k plans that shift every risk to workers, and when credit card companies charge rates that would have been considered usurious a generation ago. Policy proposals have emerged from this line of thinking. Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introduced legislation in 2019, calling for a 15% cap on credit card interest rates. And Senator Josh Hawley proposed similar limits from the other side of the aisle. As of early 2025, no federal cap had been enacted. The credit card industry has pushed back, arguing that rate caps would shrink credit availability for higher-risk borrowers. Even financial literacy itself draws fire from some corners. Lauren Willis of Loyola Law School published a paper called Against Financial Literacy Education in the Iowa Law Review in 2008, making the case that literacy programs deliver limited real-world results and can actually backfire by inflating confidence without meaningfully shifting behavior. All 3 perspectives contain real insight. For anyone watching this right now, the practical question remains: given the resources available to you today, what represents the highest impact destination for your next dollar? Your answer depends on your specific interest rates, whether an employer match exists, your age, and how many working years remain ahead of you. At a societal level, counting on individual choices to resolve a structural problem affecting tens of millions of people runs into obvious limits. Stepping back to the broadest possible frame helps clarify why everything we've discussed matters so much. Paying credit card interest transfers wealth from you to a financial institution. Everyone understands that part. But paying credit card interest instead of investing for retirement also transfers wealth from your future self to that same institution. And the amount taken from your future self runs far larger because of the compounding your future self will never receive. JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Capital One, Bank of America, American Express, and Discover earn enormous revenue from interest charges. That revenue originates somewhere. And where it originates is the monthly budgets of people who are simultaneously failing to save enough for their own retirements. No, Conspiracy theory is needed here. Simple accounting connects the interest income of the credit card industry and the retirement savings shortfall of the American public. Both compete for the same limited pool of dollars. The asymmetry between credit card interest rates and investment returns means the card company always wins in the short term. A guaranteed 21% cost versus a 7 to 10% expected return over the long run is not a contest between equals. Card issuers collect their money now, with certainty, while retirement accounts only deliver their value decades later. And only if consistent contributions survive the pressure that credit card debt applies against them. That is the erosion mechanism at work. On any single month it looks unremarkable, $200 here, $300 there, but stretched over 20 or 30 years. The cumulative difference separates a retirement that functions from one that doesn't. Practical steps exist, even inside a system stacked against you. Start by understanding the actual cost of your credit card debt. Not the monthly payment, but the total cost over the full payoff timeline. The minimum payment warning printed on your statement. Required by law since the Card Act took effect in February 2010, spells out how long payoff will take at minimum payments, and how much you'll surrender in total. Most people who actually read those numbers find them jarring. Next, run the opportunity cost calculation for your own situation. Take whatever you're sending toward monthly credit card interest and project it across your remaining working years at a reasonable assumed rate of return. Using a free compound interest calculator, the number that comes back represents the real cost of your credit card debt. Not just the interest itself, but the retirement wealth that interest is consuming year after year. If an employer-sponsored retirement plan with a match is available to you, and you're not contributing enough to capture the full match, fixing that comes first, even while you carry credit card debt. That match is free money, and passing it up compounds an already difficult situation. On the debt itself, paying anything above the minimum changes the trajectory dramatically. Even modest increases in your monthly payment can shave decades off the payoff timeline and eliminate tens of thousands of dollars in total interest. The gap between minimum payments and a fixed higher amount is measured in both years and in wealth. Be cautious about solutions that borrow from your future to pay for your present. Pulling money from your 401k through loans or hardship withdrawals to cover credit card debt might feel like progress, but you're removing dollars from a compounding environment and sacrificing growth you can never recover, on top of potential taxes and penalties. Over $1 trillion in credit card debt burdens American consumers at average interest rates above 20%. The median retirement account balance across all families sits at $87,000. The person in the middle of 401k participation holds about $35,000. Somewhere between 40 and 50% of working-age households own zero retirement savings. And roughly half of everyone carrying credit card debt acknowledges that it has directly blocked them from saving for the future. None of those numbers exist in isolation. They're cause and effect, woven together. Every dollar of credit card interest paid is a dollar that never gets invested. And every dollar that never gets invested isn't just $1 lost. It is the decades of compound growth on that dollar, gone permanently. Credit card debt operates differently from other financial burdens because of this time dimension. It doesn't temerely hurt you in the present. It reaches into the future and subtracts from the person you LLB in 20 or 30 years. That $200 a month in interest doesn't cost $200. Over 30 years at an average 8% return, it costs approximately $283,000. The forces that built this situation, from the elimination of usury caps in the early 1980s to the migration away from pensions toward 401k plans, to the recent high-rate environment, operate at a scale far beyond any individual. But understanding the mechanics gives you something to work with. Your credit card statement shows what you owe right now. What it never shows is what that debt is taking from your future. Now you have a clearer picture of that hidden number. What happens next is your call. Thanks for watching. And if this shifted how you see your own finances, send it to someone who needs to hear it.